Welcome to our Friday tasting. Sorry I missed you guys last week. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. It's definitely been a tough week out in the vineyard, but I think we actually came through pretty well, all things considering. I'm sure you've seen on the news there's been a lot of damage to area vineyards. We kind of prepare for the worst. I think 2010 taught us a lesson here that we should always be vigilant for these wacky springs. And as part of that, the 2011 Petit Verdot will be kind of an interesting reflection on how that works. Some other things that are happening here at the vineyard, we're starting to see our shoot growth. It's wet, so we can't get a lot of hand work done, but we're holding until we get a little bit more shoot growth, and we'll start doing our selection and making all the vines nice and pretty and ready to carry fruit through to harvest. The other thing that's happening inside the winery is that we're starting our rackings, which is the first time that the red wines are being separated from the solids, the yeast and grape particulate that's left over in the wine after fermentation in the barrels. So we're starting to take the wine off of that, clean the barrels, and put the wine back down. That's rack and return, the first step of clarifying. So we're just starting down that path with our 2019 red wines. As part of that, my job gets real fun because I get to start tasting all the barrels. So this is when I really get to know them. We have built our impressions on a wine during harvest, and you can really be colored really by your mood during harvest on that. So we have our good lots and our naughty lots, and then hopefully over the course of the interceding 4 months, now I can kind of take a fresh look at them, and it's nice to be pleasantly surprised. And luckily for us, 2019, such an exceptional vintage that my usual grading system is starting to break down a little bit because I'm starting to max out on my grades, and I'm not getting enough separation. So usually what we would consider an outstanding wine, it seems to be the baseline for us in 2019, and it's very, very exciting. So it'll be a good opportunity for us to taste the 2019 Petit Verdot as well. Some other things just to keep in mind is that we are still offering free shipping with the promo code SPRING. The bistro is still open for pickup and delivery within the defined radius that you can find on our website or Instagram or Facebook. And we are going to actually extend the bistro into the evening hours for our date night boxes. So that's 2 meals, an appetizer, and a dessert, and a bottle of wine for pickup or delivery within our delivery radius. That'll be available Friday, Saturday, and Sunday out of our kitchen. So please look at our menu, what we're offering. Everything that we have available here is available on Instagram, Facebook, and through our website. So let's get into it. Let's start with Petit Verdot. Petit Verdot is the oldest block on the vineyard here on the estate at Cross Keys. It was planted in 2003. We only have 1 block of Petit Verdot, but it is our largest block, contiguous vineyard block. So it's almost 4 acres of Petit Verdot, and it's on a slope, so we get a good gradient of ripening. There's also a couple clones. There's 2 clones of Petit Verdot that are really kind of standard, clone 400 and clone 1. It's a bit of a mix, which can be a little bit challenging. One of the clones likes to grow directly upwards. One of them's a little bit more sideways. So the vineyard can be a little tricky to manage that way, but for the most part, it's evenly spread, but towards the top, on the high side of the slope, we tend to ripen a little bit faster versus the lower side of the slope. And I've spent a couple years trying to really do some vineyard mapping, phenological mapping, to see how ripe that vineyard gets. At veraison, which is the process of the berries turning from green to red, we will go out, and when they're 50% turned, I will grade the relative ripeness of the vineyard block and try to find specific areas within that large block to try to make our lots out of. Now we do that, we pick selectively across the block over the course of a week or even 2 weeks sometimes. But what I found is that the blocks that I thought were going to be riper and therefore better sometimes don't perform as much as the sections that I thought were falling behind. So Petit Verdot is a bit of an enigma that way, but I like the separation that we get, and it provides a lot of interesting blending potential for us. So it's definitely a established block, but we still have a lot to learn about it. So let's start with the tasting. The first is the 2011 Petit Verdot. And when I spoke earlier about frost and its implications, what we see with frost is that it can damage the fruit for 1 year, e.g., it'll toast the shoots that we have out in the vineyard, and it eliminates, it can also toast the flower clusters before the fruit potential. And often what you'll find is that the year after frost, the fruit loads will get very high. It'll compensate. So if you lose a lot of fruit in a frost year, the next year will be really, really heavy. 2011 was an interesting year in Virginia specifically because it was known for being a wet harvest, relatively poor vintage statewide. But here in the Valley, it was absolutely perfect. The weather was good. No rains came until well after the desired pick dates for any of the grapes. But kind of the implications of the 2010 frost is that the 2011 crop load was very, very heavy. So exceptional fruit quality, but what we're starting to figure out with the Petit Verdot, and really what started in 2011, is that crop load is a direct correlation to the aromatic potential that we get out of the grapes. So 2011 is a well-made wine, great wine, but it lacks the, this before I smell it, maybe it's all changed, maybe it's different after a decade in a bottle, but kind of the knock on it was that it lacks some of those intense Petit Verdot aromatics. So it's a little bit blander rather than having that intense violet, plum, dark fruit aromatics that we look for from Petit Verdot. And the 2011 now is starting to show its age in a good way. It's developing that secondary bouquet. I'm getting a lot more hints of graphite and leather, some of those more savory notes. There's still a strong fruit note for me in the wine, but it's kind of red fruit. Maybe it lacks some of that depth and complexity that we look for in Petit Verdot. That said, on the palate, that fruit really stands out. I think that the other thing that we struggle with, that we're trying to figure out about Petit Verdot, is how much it likes oak. It's a big wine with lots of tannins, so we think it can handle a lot of oak, but sometimes that can be a little bit disrespectful to the fruit character, we feel. So we usually use not much more than 30% new oak on the Petit Verdot, and I think that really does well for aging, because this 2011, the oak is not overpowering at all. It is really just all fruit character, and as now it's sitting in my mouth, I'm getting a lot of raisin. It's almost like that bread pudding flavor. You're getting some almost yeasty notes, some bread-like notes coming from the secondary aging in the bottle, but it's really backed up by a nice dried fruit, raisiny fruit component on there. The other thing you'll notice about the 2011 is exceptional acidity. Acidity can be a problem with Petit Verdot, and really, we're really blessed here in the Valley. Petit Verdot grows so well. One problem you can have with Petit Verdot is that the acidity will be high, the ripeness won't quite be where you want it, but the acidity just will not reduce. Usually as we ripen a grape, acidity goes down, sugars go up. Sometimes Petit Verdot will stall at a sugar level and still maintain that really, really high acidity. And then as you age it, you'll notice that your pH increases. And pH, doesn't necessarily have a negative component. There's not a great hard and fast rules for pH. It is related to acidity, but what you'll find is Petit Verdot loves to pull up potassium, and it can throw its pH to a level where it's really difficult to manage it inside the winery. It's very hard to keep it from going bad, from getting contaminated. But at the same time, it has a high pH and a high acidity. It's a conundrum of Petit Verdot. Here in the Valley, we are very lucky to not have that issue, and it means that we can hold a good amount of acidity, not overpowering. We get plenty of ripeness, and it also is very stable and age-worthy. So it's an exciting variety for the Shenandoah Valley. The other part of that I find is that as that pH increases, even with that strong acidity, it's almost like a sour wine, but it is almost insipid. It makes your mouth a little, it makes the wine seem watery, even though it seems like it has a lot of tannins and sourness to it. So luckily that's something we don't have to deal with, and I think this 2011 is a great example of how acidity can carry a wine into aging. If that is not at its peak of drinking, I'd be surprised if it gets better. I mean, that's as good as I could hope for. I really enjoy that wine. I think that's definitely a drink now. Maybe it gets better, but man, I think it's perfect as it is right now. So 2017 was a great vintage for us. We're happy with all the red wines that came out of 2017, but this was the first year where we started to cut back the fruit pretty significantly. We tried to keep the fruit crop load out on Petit Verdot below 3.5 tons per acre. Petit Verdot is a very generous grape. It will try to give you 3 clusters on every shoot. So if you have 35 shoots on every vine, you can end up with well over 100 potential clusters on a grapevine. And that is way too much for it to actually ripen. So without a doubt, we always cut off the 3rd cluster, no questions asked. And then we do a selective thinning after that to select the grapes that either if they're on a small shoot, we'll cut off the 2nd cluster, or maybe both clusters, or again at veraison when the grapes are turning from green to red, we'll go back through. And anything that's still pink that hasn't caught up, it seems like it's falling behind the other clusters, we'll cut off as well. So if you come here in September and see the Petit Verdot vineyard, you're going to see an entire harvest worth of fruit laying on the floor of the vineyard. Unfortunately, it's not quite ripe enough to make wine out of, but it is necessary to get the good quality that we look for on the remaining fruit. And so 2017 for me, this is when that really intense floral note that's so attractive about Petit Verdot is very present in this wine. And even though it's a darker wine, it's definitely very, very inky. Petit Verdot loves to give color. The fruit profile for me is a little bit more on the red fruit side. So black cherry, it's not quite as dark and cooked. So it's still young and vibrant in that sense. And in the 2017, I think you'll get a feel for the tannins that we deal with in Petit Verdot. It can be very difficult for the Petit Verdot to be drinkable on kind of our production schedule. There are certain years, like 2017, when it'll develop so much tannin that it'll just kind of stay rough in its youth. This wine still has plenty of firm tannins, but they're really starting to incorporate nicely. And that, I don't want to say we figured out the aromatics with the fruit loads, but we're starting to dial that in. And so the next thing that we're working on is really trying to find those big, bold, but supple tannins that we out of Petit Verdot rather than that grippy, drying tannin. This 2017 at this point is aged long enough that it's really starting to incorporate, but I still think you can taste a little bit of the graininess that we are trying to address out of Petit Verdot. It can be a monster. It can give you much tannins. It can be a really heavy wine, and it actually throws it out of balance. The tannins make the acidity seem higher, and the acidity makes the tannins seem higher, and it's a fight until the wine is a little bit out of balance. With this wine, I don't think it's out of balance, but it lacks maybe a little bit of the refinement that we look for in the Petit Verdot. That said, I bet 50% of the people tasting it right now love that tannin texture. So we're not trying to reduce the level of tannins, we're just trying to mold them and craft them into something a little bit less edgy on the palate. It's all personal preference when it comes to those tannin textures. I'd say these are definitely ripe tannins, but maybe in a couple of years it'll start to settle into a little bit more refined style. That said, sometimes you want these young red wines that have that good tannin structure to complement food, or if you're the type of person that likes bitter food, dark coffee with no milk in it, this might be the type of wine that really appeals to you. Or if you're eating something with some char on it, something with a good amount of fat, the tannin can really kind of scrape your tongue clean and pairs well with more intensely, textural foods that have either bitterness or a high char. So like a really hot grilled steak sometimes can leave you with that tasting of the char, the bitterness that you get. And I think this wine would pair really well with that. So luckily enough, as we're learning these lessons with Petit Verdot, 2018 comes along, and it was a very tough vintage. And one thing that we saw with this was that the Petit Verdot didn't seem to notice. It kept ripening just fine on schedule. It came off maybe a little early and was probably a little diluted based on just how much rain we had gotten. But the resulting wine was very in line, very similar class to the previous two. So it really didn't have a major effect on the wine itself at all. Slightly lower tannins, we extracted a little bit less because we were afraid those tannins were going to be extra drippy because it was a little young. But it was one of those times when we worked on this wine, and what came out the other side was the same wine that we get every year. So it was exciting to see Petit Verdot be that trooper. And we started to learn that we have to really work with the vineyard. You can't really shoehorn it into a style that you're looking for because no matter what the vintage is, the Petit Verdot is going to be the Petit Verdot. And then the culmination of that was in 2019. So this is a barrel sample. This wine is months old at this point. These grapes were picked in the first week of October in 2019. And we had exceptional ripening. We were able to keep the crop load exactly where we wanted it. It was right, it kind of hit all of the metrics that we were looking for potential. And so inside the winery, we knew we had the aromatic potential, and then it was all about working with those tannins and trying to figure those out. So the way that we addressed that during fermentation was to really focus more on pump overs, which is the process of drying wine out of the bottom of a fermenting vat of grapes and then pumping them over the top. And that process, is very aerobic. Lots of air gets incorporated, even to the point where we'll use a special machine I talked about a couple weeks ago. Not a machine, a fitting that will actually inject air into the stream of wine as it's being pumped. So really trying to oxygenate it as much as possible. That starts the polymerization process of those tannins and really helps them get supple earlier. We're not trying to reduce the amount of tannins we get. We still extract the tank. In 2019 vintage, our vat times were longer just because we had more sugar, more alcohol to ferment. So we went well into the 14-day mark on the Petit Verdots. And in normal years, we'll do 7 to 10 days. So it was spent more time in tank. It had more extraction. But during that extraction, we tried to incorporate that oxygen to make a more richer, more supple wine. And in the 2019, you can really smell the vintage of those aromas. At this point, this is kind of the pinnacle of what I think we look for the Petit Verdot aromas. This has got a lot of fruit jumping off the page. And maybe it lacks a little bit of that floralness. We picked that lot or that vineyard in at least 3 separate picks. I think we did 4 picks in 2019. The last one was just a small pick for experimentation. But 3 main picks for the vineyard. And those are at different stages when we do the picking, different stages of ripening. So one of the lots has a little bit more of the floral notes. One of them is just an absolute fruit bomb. And so that gives us a lot of options for blending later on. If we're looking for a little bit more of that violet character, we can get it. Another interesting thing you find with ripe Petit Verdot is this Coca-Cola note that is just, you can really smell it on the fermenter too, especially during the pump over. If we splash it into a tank or into our sump cart, which is just a metal box that collects the wine as it's getting pumped over the top of the tank. It obviously smells like red wine, but as you do that and kind of blow off the fermentation smell, you're kind of left with this Coca-Cola scent that you get. So it's a nice brown spice that kind of underlies those floral flavors. That's a young wine. So tasting, will be exciting for, I think most of you probably never get a chance to taste wine that's this young and unrefined. I think first thing you'll notice is how much it fills the mouth, how there's a lot of tannins in there, but they seem to kind of touch every edge of, your cheeks, the back of your teeth, the front of your teeth, your tongue. They're omnipresent on the palate. So definitely a lot of tannin. They're still quite strong. But this is before this wine has seen any aging oxygen. So it was fermenting under CO2. We tried to get oxygen in during fermentation. And then at that point, it goes to barrel and it goes into a relatively low oxygen environment. And so this still has oxygen potential, reduction potential. So we can still give this wine more oxygen to continue to further refine those tannins, but we have a good base. I'm happy with where they're at. They seem ripe. There's a great sweetness to the wine. It's not actual sugar, but what you'll find is at a certain alcohol level, playing with the tannins, you can almost get, and then also those fruit notes, you can almost get a sweet perception on the back, and I really like that. I want acidity and then maybe a hint of a sweet aftertaste to really carry that fruit through. Is really what I'm looking for in our big red wines. Helps balance out those strong tannins. The next step for this wine, which will be happening starting next week, is we'll start the rack and return, the délestage process of the aging. So these barrels will be emptied of their wine very carefully. We have a special piece of equipment. We call it a bulldog. We actually have a racketeer. But the point is, we inject the barrel with an inert gas like nitrogen, and that'll force the wine to travel out of a tube that we have inside the wine. So a stainless steel racking wand. And on that racking wand, there's a section of it that's transparent. It's made out of glass. And so as we will lower the racking arm deeper and deeper into that barrel, we're able to see the exact point when we get to the solids that have all fallen to the bottom of the barrel over the course of the last few months. And so we'll leave the solids behind, just draw off the clean wine, clean the barrels, refill the barrels, and during that process, we'll pick up a lot of oxygen, not a lot, but a responsible amount of oxygen in the wine, and that helps further refine it. And then based on how the wines age after that, within a month or two, we'll have an idea of if they need another rack and return, if they need a little bit more oxygen, and we'll start building the blends at that point. So that's what we have in store for this. The 2019, we really look at it as potential wine. And what's really fun with these tastings for me is that I get to taste the end product, which I don't get to do quite as often as I should. I'm always tasting wines in the young stage. So hopefully you can see the building blocks and how they will age over time. But we want to start with everything that we can and really mold it into a good wine. So the acidity, the alcohol, the tannins, we want them all to be present and balanced. And then it's just tweaking them, refining them until we get to a nicely ageable product. So I'm going to switch back around to 2011. And I think it'll be interesting to try to see the comparison between the young wine. This is the same vineyard block. All of these vintages were relatively ripe. 2019, very ripe, but nothing, it's not a whole different class of wine compared to the others. So these are three ripe vintages that we're all very, very happy with. And so I think the starting point of all these wines is probably pretty similar. As the 2011 sits in the glass, I get more of that red fruit, which is interesting. We never really associate Petit Verdot with red fruit, but that maybe is my internal bias. As I'm tasting them kind of with fresh eyes here, I kind of see where some of the fruit notes in the young wine can evolve a little bit more into that, dried cranberry almost aromatics that we're getting on the 11. And I really think the tannins are more similar on the 2019 and the 2011 than they are to the 17. I think that has come with age. I think oxygen over time in the bottle has yielded that tannin texture that we're looking for, but it looks like we've started down that road already on the 2019. It's funny to describe a wine, but in my mind, I always try to compare it to a fabric or an actual texture inside the mouth. We'll say satiny or velvety or sandpaper for tannin. For me, I almost have the sense of almost a little bit elastic and stringy. They seem like long tannins. It seems like they roll around in your mouth. They stay there, but they're not like digging in. So more like a river rock, a pebble than gravel. So it's a pebbly texture to the tannin, which I really enjoy. Whereas I find it's a little rougher, a little bit more hard edges on the 2017. But I think that those floral notes on the 2017 are just outstanding. That's a great example of Shenandoah Valley Petit Verdot, actually. And so when it comes to aging potential, I think the 11 is peaking, and the 17, I think it's definitely drinkable right now. I think it needs something salty, some salty food to stand up to it, help cut those tannins a little bit. But it's very pleasant on its own. I think it would be an interesting wine if you had an entire glass of it, I think you might actually, I don't think those tannins are going to build too much. I think you're going to keep enjoying the texture on that wine.
Question, how will the 2017 evolve over time?
So I think if I had to guess, and once it's in a bottle, it's kind of hard out of our hands, but as we taste these and see how the Petit Verdot evolves in general, I think the tannins on the 2017 are going to incorporate. I don't find them, out of balance right now, but there's definitely still present. So I think what you're going to find is the texture of the wine that you taste on the tip of your tongue with the 2017. The tip of your tongue is a little bit dry. I think that's going to move farther and farther back on the palate. So I think it'll get more and more, almost like a richness to the wine. And then that you won't have those hard edges. For me, I get it kind of on the back sides of my tongue after I swallow the wine. A little bit of the tannins texture, the edges of the tannin, and I think that's going to go away probably entirely relatively soon. So if you like the tannic wine, I think the 2017 is good, but if it's maybe a little bit too bitter for your liking, I think it's on its way to really smoothing out. And like I said, drinking wine is always a situation, situationally dependent. I think if you have the wrong wine with the wrong food, or if you have the wrong attitude, no wine's going to taste right. So, if you're having a cigar and you want to drink some wine with that, with your, then the 2017 is clearly the choice. You know, one of those situations when your mouth is, you know, kind of experiencing a lot of textures. The 17 can stand up to that, whereas I think you could potentially overpower the more delicate 2011. I think the other thing is the red fruit that we're getting, that raisin, cranberry, craisin note that seems to be lacking in the 2017. I think it'll show up. I think the floral is dominating right now on the 17, but I really enjoy that. And if the floral's there, that means the fruit's there, especially in that vintage. So I think it'll develop a little bit more fruitiness, a little bit more perceived sweetness on it as well. So I'm gonna take one more taste of the 2011 here. I'd say order your bottles now, because at least one or two of them is coming home with me tonight. This is drinking exceptionally well. But if you have any other questions, please, now's the time to ask.
The ideal temperature to store this wine?
You know, really, there's an infinite amount of literature out there on ideal storage temperatures, and people can, you know, justify building really expensive cellars because of those. The general rule of thumb is that if a human's happy, the wine's going to be happy. You don't want it to be too humid. You don't want it to be too dry. You don't want it to be too hot. You don't want it to be too cold. So, you know, ideally kind of the coldest part of your house, out of direct sunlight. But if that's 65, really the wine will be okay. The humidity's also not as critical as one would lead you to believe. The wine is wet, ergo the cork will stay wet. It's really not as important as long as you're not getting too extremely cold, too extremely hot, too extremely dry, or too extremely wet. So if you're comfortable, the wine will be comfortable, but typically out of sunlight.
What dish do you recommend with the 2011?
The 2011, good question. I would say I'm actually would be tempted to go a little off board with it. You know, I think it could pair pretty well across the board. I think for me, for some reason, those bread notes are really attractive. So I think something with a pastry component would be a nice complement to that. Definitely, if yeah, so like something with like a butter sauce. I'm going to be a little bit more specific for you, but obviously in these times, all of our refrigerators are a little bit bare, so I'm trying to imagine what I would be cooking with it. I think it's definitely like some sort of beef and sauce, so like a stroganoff would be really good. IKEA just released their Swedish meatballs recipe, so I think this would be perfect with that. Actually, kind of that dried. I'm of Swedish heritage, so Swedish meatballs are kind of like my. Yeah, that's my home comfort food. So I think this would be a perfect Swedish meatballs. You can imagine kind of a powerful, a strong meat, red meat, but it kind of in that sauce that you know, maybe instead of a charred situation or a grilled situation, think of more of a sauce situation. So beef stew, patafa, or like I said, meatballs or Italian meatballs.
What are you most excited about from the 2019 vintage, and when are we going to bottle?
You know, it's really hard to say what I'm most excited about. It's kind of a day-by-day revelation of quality as I'm inside the cellar. I'm tasting through the lots now, starting to build blends as we get into our racking. Just yesterday, I did the Chamberson, and it was absolutely outstanding. It was exceptional. I obviously have tasted through the Petit Verdot. Like I said, my scale is a little broken, so I kind of added a number on top. So I think one of the Petit Verdot lots is just outstanding. It's got near perfect balance. We'll see where that ends up. It's all about how the wines play together when it's time for blending. But that said, I'm not going to count out the Cab Franc. We had a lot of success with Cab Franc. The Touriga has the same, you know, it's different than Petit Verdot, but we've also found aromatics are related to crop load and Touriga too, and we really nailed it on the Touriga. We have some really exciting aromatics in the Touriga. I'm really excited for our experimentation. So we built a new production facility last year. It gave us a lot of space and room to work in. Our logistics were much more simplified in the new production facility, and that allowed us to do some experimentation. So we have stem inclusion in the Touriga and then the Cab Franc. We have all sorts of different temperatures that we did our fermentations, different extraction profiles, bat times, cold soaks. And so now is the time where I can start, what I'm excited about is tasting each one of those experiments and see how they'll play into the styles of wine that we want to make here going forward. So I hope you enjoyed that. I think this would also be interesting if whatever you have for dinner tonight, take a bite, try a wine, take a bite, try a different wine. I think you'll really see how wine and food plays together. It's always, it's cheating for a winemaker to say, drink your wine with food. We try to make wines you can drink on their own, but they really are made to go together, wine and food. So you can start to get a feel for what you like. The other exciting thing is I hinted at it in last week's video, but the Nouvelle is now for sale. We're very excited for our first sparkling release. All I can say so far is that my wife loves it, so hopefully that means you guys will too. Find it on our website, pickup, delivery, shipping, use promo code SPRING. It's a Charmat style sparkling wine and made out of Vidal Blanc. It's our first foray into sparkling wine. We're also excited we're going to start working on our traditional method, champagne style Blanc de Noir, coming up soon as well. So we're getting into the sparkling, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
2 weeks, next tasting.
Oh, and in 2 weeks, we'll be doing our next tasting, and be sure to check on Instagram, Facebook, and our website, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys then. And maybe you'll get another video, hopefully with a little bit cheerier subject matter next week. Thank you.